Let me ask you something. Do you believe in ghosts? Most people say no until something whispers their name at 3 a.m. Keep listening, and maybe tonight you'll change your mind. The Night Watcher. This happened in the fall of 2021 when I was living alone in a rented townhouse in southern Illinois. It was my first time ever living by myself, and even though I was technically an adult 27, with a full-time job and a stable routine, I still had a lot of nerves about the idea. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I thought the silence and solitude might help me process everything. The townhouse was part of a small row of identical units, kind of plain but clean and quiet, tucked away in a sleepy cul-de-sac just off a rural highway. The neighborhood had that sterile suburban vibe. Lots of beige vinyl siding, trimmed hedges, wind chimes, and mailboxes with family names stenciled on them. Mostly older folk, but a few young families. I didn't know any of my neighbors well, but I liked it that way. I kept to myself, but almost right away, I noticed one person who stood out from the rest. He lived 3 doors down, a tall, heavy-set man, probably in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a weird habit of standing outside his house at night, sometimes just pacing or smoking, sometimes doing nothing at all, just staring. I'd pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m., and there he'd be, leaning against his porch rail or standing at the edge of his driveway facing the street. He never waved, never smiled. He just stared, even if I looked directly at him. I tried to ignore it. A couple of times I mentioned it to friends or my mom, and they said maybe he was just a night owl or had insomnia. But there was something unsettling about him, like he was always watching but never participating. It wasn't just that he was there, it was the stillness. He didn't fidget or check his phone or shift his weight. He just stood there like a statue. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the more time passed, the more that gnawing feeling in my gut grew. Then the noises started. It was around mid-September when I first heard it. I had just gotten home from work after a long shift. I worked late hours managing inventory at a distribution center and usually got in around 10:30 p.m., exhausted, grabbing a bite to eat, and crashing. That night, I fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up to a sound I can only describe as metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought I had dreamed it, but then I heard it again, a long, slow creaking noise, like an old gate opening. My bedroom was on the first floor at the back of the unit, and I had a sliding glass door with vertical blinds that led to a small fenced-in backyard. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps, soft crunching sounds, like someone walking slowly across gravel. My entire backyard was lined with decorative rock instead of grass, so you could hear every footstep clearly. These weren't animal sounds. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I didn't have a weapon, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand, just in case, which at the time felt kind of ridiculous. I crouched by the edge of the window and peeked through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. The motion light wasn't on, which meant either they were out of range or had come in a different way. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm, asked for my address, and told me officers were en route. I stayed crouched in the dark, barely breathing. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my front window. I got up, opened the door, and met the 2 officers outside. I explained everything, what I heard, what time it started. One of them walked around the back while the other stayed with me and asked a few questions. The officer in the yard came back and said the gate was closed and there were no signs of tampering, but said he'd write up a report just in case. They didn't see anyone, no footprints or damage, basically no crime. One of them actually said, "Probably just a raccoon," and gave me a look that clearly said, "You're wasting our time." I didn't argue. They left after about 10 minutes. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I went outside to check the backyard myself. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a flat stone about the size of a paperback book wedged under the bottom edge of the wooden fence gate. I hadn't noticed it before. The gate had a heavy spring that made it swing closed automatically, but the stone looked like it had been placed there specifically to stop it from closing all the way. It was subtle, like something someone would do if they wanted to come back later and slip in without making noise. I picked up the rock and tossed it across the yard. I called the police again and told them what I'd found. They told me they'd noted in the report, but again said there wasn't much they could do. I asked if they could talk to any of the neighbors or check for cameras. They said now unless a crime was committed, they couldn't investigate. I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 nights later, it escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of my back door handle turning. The handle rattled gently at first, like someone testing it, then a harder jiggle, like someone trying to open it. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. My mouth went dry. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the police again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway, out of view. I didn't have a gun or a dog, just that stupid kitchen knife. My motion light clicked on, and through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was a man. He didn't run or try to hide. He just stood there. The same 2 officers showed up again. This time they actually found footprints in the gravel big ones heading right up to the door. But again, they said since no entry had been made, there wasn't enough to go on. They promised to patrol the area more often and told me to keep my doors locked. The next day, I installed cameras. They were mid-range Wi-Fi security cams. I set one up above the back door and another above the front porch. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:14 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. Then at 2:23 a.m., the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He walked in through the gate like he knew exactly how to move to avoid the motion sensor until the last second. He was tall and broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans and gloves. He walked up to the door, looked up directly at the camera, and smiled. Slow, stretched out grin. Then he backed up, still staring, and disappeared into the dark. I called the police again, and they came back, watched the clip, and admitted that yes, it was unsettling. But since he didn't break in, didn't damage property, and didn't appear to be armed, there was still allegedly nothing they could do. They wouldn't even ask the guy down the street to check his doorbell cam. I begged them. They said their hands were tied. That night, I packed a bag and slept at a hotel. When I came back the next day, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door, too high up and too low, like someone had crouched down and just rested their hands there for a while, staring in. I moved out a week later. I broke my lease and forfeited my deposit. I didn't care. I couldn't stay there another night. The final straw was the note I found wedged in my mailbox the day I left. It was handwritten in small, cramped letters on lined notebook paper. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one last report. The officer I spoke to that time looked genuinely disturbed by the note. He promised they'd do a wellness check on the neighborhood. But it was too late. I never went back. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook from a girl named Kayla. She said she was the new tenant who had moved into the unit after me. Her message said, "Hi, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here. Did you ever have someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night, and last night someone knocked on the glass door around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I didn't reply. I didn't want to know what happened next. The phone house. I work for a property preservation company. Basically, we handle foreclosed homes, securing them, cleaning them out, winterizing them, sometimes even boarding them up if there's been vandalism. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well, and for the most part, it's quiet. You spend a lot of time alone in houses that used to belong to people who are long gone. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's just boring, but every once in a while, you get a house that feels unsettling. This happened in 2020 when I was assigned to clear out a property in a rural part of upstate New York. It was one of those dying places, only one gas station, half the businesses shuttered, roads cracked and overgrown. The house itself was a small, one-story place off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown brush and woods on 3 sides. No other homes nearby, just trees and silence. According to the file, the house had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the estate. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. Our job was to catalog any remaining property, empty it out, and secure it for winter. I drove up on a Monday morning around 9 a.m. with a small box truck and all my gear. From the outside, the house looked intact, windows closed, door locked, roof fine, just a lot of weeds and vines climbing up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because it had swollen in the frame, but once inside, everything looked pretty standard. It was dusty, stale air and faded furniture. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had no signal out there. I'd already checked and noticed I had no bars, but the phone buzzed anyway. There was no number on the caller ID. It just said, "Unknown caller." I answered, and there was nothing, just a low crackling sound like static. I said hello twice, then hung up, chalked it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start with photos documenting every room, every item. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, lace curtains, and framed paintings. It reminded me of my grandma's house. Heavy furniture, doilies, porcelain figures. The hallway had a smell, not rot, more like mildew and dust, and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One had been stripped bare except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room, with thread spools everywhere and a dusty machine on the desk. I took a closer look, and there was a corkboard filled with old newspaper clippings, mostly obituaries, dozens of them, all clipped out with scissors and pinned carefully to the board. No names I recognized, all local. I moved on. In the master bedroom, there was a rotary phone on the nightstand. I remember stopping and staring at it for a second because I hadn't seen one in years. It was off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord, the kind of phone that would never ring again because the line had been cut long ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. It said, "Unknown caller" again. This time I hesitated. I picked it up, stepped out into the hallway, and answered. Again, nothing. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard a whisper, very soft, so quiet I could barely make it out. It said, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." Then the line went dead. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. The house was dead silent. I checked the windowsill closed. Nobody was outside, and there was no sign of forced entry. My first thought was that someone had pranked me, what anyone would think. Maybe one of the other crew guys was messing with me, but no one else knew I was there that early, and again, I had no signal. I checked my phone 1 bar, then nothing. Like it flickered in and out of existence. I tried calling my supervisor, but the call failed. I decided to finish the job quickly. I started boxing up loose items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware, but the whole time I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing down there. Then the phone rang a 3rd time, but not my phone. The rotary phone in the bedroom. I heard it from across the house, a shrill, mechanical ring that echoed through the rooms. That phone should have been dead. The line was disconnected, no dial tone, no service, but yet it rang, like an old-fashioned bell. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, phone still in my hand. It rang again and again. I stepped into the doorway. The phone sat on the nightstand, the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. There was no chance I was picking up that phone. The rings eventually stopped. I backed out of the room. I wanted to leave, but part of my job was securing the property, and I still had to check the basement. I almost said screw it, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how scared I was. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, flashlight in hand. I smelled mold and something like rust. There were shelves along the wall filled with old paint cans and some broken furniture. In the back corner, there was a small table. On it sat a cordless phone. Newer model, gray plastic and covered in dust, and next to it, a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name, a date, and a short sentence. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019 rang once, didn't answer. Carl M., September 12th, 2019 picked up, warned him. It was all like this, dozens of entries. I dropped the notebook, and my heart felt like it completely dropped out of my body as I looked around the basement, fearing I wasn't alone down there, that someone was watching me from any corner in the darkness. I rushed back up the stairs, looking behind me the whole time, heart in my throat. I didn't finish the job. I drove straight back to the office and turned in my report. I didn't tell them everything. I just said the property was unsafe and possibly had squatters or interference. They reassigned the job to another crew. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd gone out there that morning to finish the job. I hadn't told him specifically what happened. His message said, "The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there." What the hell? I called his work cell immediately, and he told me he didn't answer the phone in the house because he was too freaked out. The next day, Mark apparently quit without notice and never returned to work. He's not dead or anything. Admittedly looked him up on Facebook eventually, and he'd posted stuff since then, but I never spoke to him again. I don't know what else he saw in that house, but it must have been something bad enough for him to want to distance himself from the job entirely. My boss did call the police to report the potential squatters after Mark quit, but they found nobody inside the house. Everything about that place, from its location to its eerie, dilapidated interior, to the phone calls to my cell, and that voice on the line, and that damn house phone ringing, it's like I found myself in a legitimate horror movie. I swear it had to be one of two things: an elaborate, sick prank, or an equally elaborate trap. The basement knocks. This happened in 2019. I was in my late 20s, living alone in a rental house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. It wasn't a fancy place, just an older one-story house with creaky floors, thin walls, and a small backyard, but it was cheap, and it came with a basement, which I used to store extra furniture and tools. I moved in that spring, and for the first few months, nothing strange happened. The house had its quirks. Some pipes rattled when you turned on the shower, and there was one kitchen cabinet that always swung open on its own, but nothing unusual for a place that old. The only part I didn't like was the basement. The door was in the hallway next to the bathroom. It was heavy and stuck a little when you opened it, and the light switch for the basement was actually halfway down the stairs, which meant you had to walk down a few steps in total darkness before you could reach it. The first time I went down there, I honestly felt weird, not scared exactly, but uneasy. The single bulb didn't do much to light the corners, and the whole place smelled like old wood. But I didn't have any reason to be down there for long, so I stored my things, shut the door, and didn't think much of it. That changed around late October. I had just gotten home from work. I'm a night shift security guard, so I usually get home around 3 a.m., and I was heading to the bathroom before bed when I heard something. It sounded like a faint knock. 3 soft taps. It came from behind the basement door. I froze in place. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it, maybe it was the pipes or the house settling, but as I stood there holding my breath, I heard it again. 3 distinct knocks. I backed up a few steps and stared at the door, then waited. There was just silence now. I remember whispering to myself, "It's just the house," even though I didn't really believe it. I didn't open the door. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and stayed awake for the next 2 hours, listening. Eventually, I fell asleep with the TV on. The next morning, I checked the basement. I opened the door, went down the stairs, and turned on the light. Everything was exactly the way it left it, no signs of anyone having been down there. No footprints in the dust, no broken windows. I convinced myself it had to be the house shifting, or maybe a small animal that got in somehow. I moved on, but a few nights later, it happened again. This time, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard the knock. Not 3 taps this time, just 1, but it was loud, and it was close, like someone had used their knuckles hard against the basement door. I opened the bathroom door and looked. The basement door was closed. Nothing moved. The hallway was quiet. I walked over and put my ear against the wood. At first, I heard nothing, but then very faint. I heard what sounded like breathing. Slow, steady, as if someone was standing on the other side, waiting. I backed away and went to my room again, locking the door. I called my landlord. I told him something strange was going on in the basement, that I thought someone had maybe gotten into the house somehow. He seemed skeptical but said he'd come by to check it out. When he arrived in the morning, we both went down into the basement together. He looked around, checked the windows, the walls, even the foundation. Nothing was damaged or broken. No signs of a break-in or animals. I didn't say anything. I couldn't explain what I was hearing, and I didn't want to sound crazy. For the next week, things were quiet. I started to think maybe I was just overtired or imagining things. I was working too much after all. But then, one night around 2 a.m., I was sitting on my couch watching TV when I heard the basement door creak. Not a knock or a slam, but a creak like it was slowly swinging open. I sat up straight and turned down the volume. I could hear it clearly, the slow, grinding creak of hinges moving. I got up and peeked down the hallway, and the basement door was wide open. I hadn't opened it in over a week. I hadn't even touched it. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward it. I didn't have a weapon, but I had no choice. I had to know what was going on. I stood at the top of the stairs and shined the light down. The basement was pitch black. The bulb wasn't on. I reached around the corner and flicked the switch. Nothing. It was dead. The bulb must have burned out. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They weren't rushing, they were slow, but they were unmistakably footsteps. I backed away, my hands shaking. I slammed the door shut and held the handle tight. For a moment, I felt pressure from the other side, like something was leaning against the door. Then it stopped. I locked the door and called the police. I told them someone was in my basement. They showed up about 10 minutes later, and 2 officers cleared the house and went down into the basement. I stood in the front yard, waiting, and after what felt like forever, they came back up. They said they didn't find anyone, no signs of forced entry, no one hiding, nothing disturbed. One of them even tried to laugh it off, asking if I'd been watching scary movies, but I knew what I heard. After they left, I didn't go back inside right away. I just stood there staring at that house. Finally, I went back in, locked every door and window, and stayed up until the sun came up. That morning, I bought a padlock and installed it on the basement door. I didn't care if it was allowed or not, I needed it. For the next month, the basement stayed quiet. No sounds, no knocks, nothing. I almost let myself relax. Then one night, I got home from work and noticed the basement door was open, not just unlocked. The padlock was lying on the floor, broken. The door itself was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched that door in weeks. I stood there staring at it, and for the first time, I realized something. Every time this had happened, every noise, every knock, it had always been at night, and always when I was alone. I didn't go down. I couldn't. I packed a bag, left the house, and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. When I came back, I literally nailed the basement door shut. I even wedged a chair against it. I didn't care if the landlord got mad. I just couldn't look at that door anymore. A few nights later, around 3 a.m., I was lying in bed when I heard a sound I still can't explain. It was a voice. It wasn't loud, not even word, just the faint, low rumble of someone's vocal cords vibrating. It came from somewhere beneath the floorboards, directly under my bed. That was it. I called the police again. They showed up, searched the house, and once again, nothing turned up. So I packed everything except the stuff in the basement and I left. I didn't even wait for the lease to end. I don't know what was in that basement. I don't want to know. All I can say is that sometimes, when I lie awake at night in my new apartment, I think about all of this, and I wonder if I'd waited just a little longer, what would have come up those steps. The Matanikis Rock Incident. My cousin Nate is in the Coast Guard, and he has been for over a decade. He's not the kind of guy to lie or make things up. He's one of the most straightforward people I know, real grounded, not superstitious, not into horror. Just a practical guy who likes boats and order. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. I asked him to repeat it more than once because of how messed up it was, and every time, the details stayed the same. This happened back in 2017, when he was assigned to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine on a 2-week maintenance rotation. The place was called Matanikis Rock, and its way out there you can only get to it by boat or helicopter. It's nothing more than a jagged, rocky island with a single lighthouse and one auxiliary building that stores fuel and maintenance equipment. There's no power grid, no plumbing, and barely any cell signal. The lighthouse itself is automated, but it still requires occasional manual upkeep, which is why the Coast Guard sends people out to it every year or so. Usually, it's a solo assignment, but there had been strange electrical failures the year before, so for this trip, they decided to send 2 people, Nate and another guy named Russell. The first few days were fine, windy, boring, and repetitive. During the day, they'd check the beacon mechanics, test the emergency batteries, refill the diesel generator, and scrape off layers of salt corrosion from the metal interior. At night, they'd read, eat simple meals, and kill time playing cards. It was isolation, but it was expected no red flags. Then, on the 4th night, Nate woke up around 2 in the morning, feeling weird. Not sick, not in pain. Just like something was wrong with the atmosphere. The air was heavier than usual, and he said it felt like standing in a room right before a thunderstorm, except the sky outside was clear and silent. He sat up and looked around. It was dark. Then he noticed something. There was no rotation from the beacon. The lighthouse was supposed to send out a sweeping light beam every few seconds, even during maintenance, and it was a huge deal if the light failed. He got up and shook Russell awake, and the 2 of them made their way up the narrow spiral staircase to the top of the tower to see what was going on. When they got up there, they found the gears that rotated the beacon were still moving, but the actual light itself wasn't turning. Something was jammed in the mechanism. It was a large, dark piece of cloth like a blanket, or an old coat wedged deep into the gear assembly. The thing was soaked, covered in a slimy, mossy substance, and it smelled like rotting seaweed and mildew. They were both confused. The door had been locked and the windows were sealed. No wind, no birds, it didn't make sense. So they removed the fabric, tossed it outside into the wind, and went back to bed, thinking it was just some bizarre one-off incident. The next night, the exact same thing happened again. Around the same time, just after 2, Nate woke up and saw that the beacon wasn't turning. They went up and found another piece of cloth jammed into the same mechanism, only this time it wasn't the same type of fabric. It was smaller, looked like an old-fashioned scarf or a shawl. It was red, frayed at the edges, and soaked through with what looked like ocean water. It even had tiny crustaceans clinging to it, like it had just come out of the sea. Nate said that was the moment things stopped feeling coincidental. They checked the doors, the windows, the supply closet, everything was secure. Now they were starting to wonder if someone was messing with them, or worse, if something had gotten into the lighthouse and was deliberately trying to screw with the light. From that night on, they began blocking the stairwell with heavy crates after doing the final check upstairs. They locked the beacon room and the bottom entrance religiously, but on the 7th night, something happened that Nate still refuses to try to explain. He said he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when he heard Russell whispering from across the room. but he wasn't talking to Nate. He was murmuring to the corner of the room, saying strange, disconnected things, like someone was standing there. Nate leaned up and asked what he was saying, and Russell blinked slowly, looking confused. He told Nate he wasn't saying anything, but later that night Nate woke again and found Russell sitting at the window, staring down at the rocks below. When he asked what he was doing, Russell said he thought he'd seen someone standing down there on the rocks the night before, barely visible on the edge of the beacon light. He said it looked like someone was watching them and then disappeared when the light rotated back. After that, things started spiraling. Russell got weirder every day. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, and just stared out the window for hours. Nate asked him if he was okay, and Russell would just mutter about noises in the wall or about hearing voices from inside the stairwell. On the 9th night, they both heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the usual creaking from the wind, but real, slow, deliberate footsteps, and after the other coming down from the beacon room above. Nate looked over and saw Russell standing at the bottom of the stairs, frozen and staring up. He asked him if he'd gone up there, and Russell just looked at him and said no, then asked if Nate had. Neither of them had moved. They stood there listening, but the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. That night, they shoved a dresser in front of the bedroom door and slept with knives under their pillows. On the 11th night, they were woken again by the beacon failing. This time, when they reached the top of the lighthouse, the beacon room door was wide open, not just unlocked, not just cracked open, but completely swung open like someone had kicked it in. The wind was howling through, and when they got inside, the beacon wasn't just stopped, it had been deliberately tampered with. The bulb was unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the room. That thing is industrial grade. You can't just twist it off by hand without effort. Nate stared at it, terrified, while Russell just kept muttering that someone had done it. Then Nate felt something brush against his back, something cold. He spun around, but no one was there. Russell had gone pale. He just kept pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand come out of the bricks. They ran back down the stairs and locked themselves in the bedroom. Nate didn't sleep at all. Russell started rocking back and forth in the corner, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The next morning, Nate used the emergency sat phone and called for an early pickup, saying there had been a serious mechanical failure. The boat showed up that afternoon, but here's the creepiest part. When they arrived, the crew asked them about the distress call they had made at 2:12 a.m. that morning. But Nate had never made any call. He didn't touch the phone until daylight. The deckhand said they'd received a garbled call that came through with static and a voice saying something about someone being there with them. Then it cut out. Russell didn't speak the entire ride back. He quit the Coast Guard a few months later and never told anyone what really happened out there. Nate still does maintenance duty sometimes, but he says he'll never, ever go back to Matnikis Rock. The Montauk Encounter. This happened during the COVID lockdowns, around that point when everyone was really getting sick of it and going stir-crazy, cooped up in their houses with nothing to do. I was single at the time, swiping on Tinder and DMing people while watching movies and shows, because really, what else was there to do on a weeknight during lockdown? I struck up a conversation with a girl I'd been following on Instagram for years. Her name was Sophia, she goes by Soph. We live in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York, about 20 to 30 minutes from the Hamptons and roughly an hour from Montauk. We were bored one night and agreed to hang out. She lived about 5 minutes from me, conveniently, so I picked her up. We went for a drive to a nearby park that was closed, and we just drank White Claws there. I immediately got the vibe that she was a little rebellious, but in a cool way. She was down to hop fences, trespass, do spontaneous things like that. There was a mutual connection very quickly, and within less than an hour, she came up with the idea of driving out to Montauk and walking the cliff trail around the lighthouse. Technically, the lighthouse grounds were closed past sunset, maybe even entirely closed during lockdown, but right away, I said I was down. I like adventures like that. So we finished our drinks and drove all the way out east to Montauk Point. When we got there, she told me to just park in the lighthouse lot. I hesitated, but she seemed confident there would be no security on a random Tuesday night during lockdown in the off-season. I didn't see any cars in sight, so I took her word for it. She said she'd done this before, even pre-COVID. We parked and had another white claw in the lot. I kept nervously glancing around, scanning for security vehicles, but she kept telling me to relax. Eventually, we started walking toward the lighthouse. Seeing a lighthouse up close at night, it's so cool, but also a bit eerie. There's something kind of liminal about it, like it sits halfway between the world of the living and the unknown. Soph led the way, taking a slightly off-path route so we wouldn't be walking directly into the light and risk exposing ourselves. It was my first time ever visiting the Montauk Lighthouse. She led us to the cliffside behind it, where a trail of rocks formed the path known as the Cliff Walk. We navigated solely with our flashlights. Maybe there were supposed to be lights down there, but that night, almost everything was dark except a few lamps near the entrance, and of course, the lighthouse beam sweeping the sea. As we made our way carefully along the rocky trail, Soph, who was now walking behind me, suddenly said my name. I turned around, and she was pointing her flashlight behind her, illuminating someone else on the rocks. When we both aimed our lights in that direction, we could see him more clearly, a man, wearing a dark coat with the hood pulled up. He looked like he might have been black, but we couldn't tell his age or much else about him. I called out, asking if he worked there, but he didn't answer, and he wasn't moving either. I followed up with, "We're gonna leave, sorry," mostly nervous that he might have been security and we were about to get in trouble. But then the guy spoke. He said, "Y'all want to buy some Coke?" Finding out he wasn't security, but just some random guy, wasn't a relief at all. If anything, it made everything worse. Why the hell was this creepy guy following us? Why was he even there? I said, "No, man, we're good," and motioned for Soph to keep moving. I let her go in front of me, and we pressed forward along the cliff. As we walked, the guy started moving too. He didn't follow up with anything, are you sure? Or come on, he just stayed silent, walking at the same pace as us. Every time Soph or I glanced back with our flashlights, he was the same distance away. It was the strangest, most uncomfortable thing. The rest of the walk felt painfully tense. We made it to the end of the cliff walk and hurried through the grass back toward the car. The guy was still behind us, matching our speed. Then we heard him call something over to use. It sounded like, "Where are you going?" His tone wasn't friendly. This guy was obviously looking for trouble. I didn't want to provoke anything, so I ignored him and told Soph not to respond either. We walked quickly, side by side, and that's when we noticed two more guys walking toward us from behind. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to run. It felt like that would definitely trigger a chase, but one of the new guys yelled something too. I couldn't even make out what it was. We reached the car and jumped inside, and both of us screamed when we realized the three guys were right there, practically on top of the car. I hit the lock button just in time, maybe seconds before two of them tried the doors. I threw the car into reverse, the only direction that wouldn't hit anyone, and backed out fast. They kicked and hit the sides as we pulled away, but they didn't chase us once we were moving. On the drive back, both of our hearts were pounding. After the adrenaline wore off, we were completely silent. I dropped Soph off, and we called it a night. We actually hung out several times after that, and we still talk today, but that night still unsettles me. It was too close, way too close to something bad happening. My friends think it might have been a gang, maybe the Crips. Whatever it was, I have zero interest in ever going back to Montauk Point at night again. Ian's Lighthouse Account. My name is Gregory. This is a story my old friend Ian has told me many times, something that happened to him many moons ago. I asked him recently to write it all down in detail, and with his permission, I'm sharing it here, because I've always found it deeply unsettling. Ian was one of those guys you only had to meet once to know he was the real deal. He was in his 50s back then, solid build, weathered skin from decades of working in salt air. He worked in marine salvage and coastal infrastructure. Basically, when something broke near the water, Ian was one of the people you'd call to go fix it. But he wasn't just a contractor. He'd been a diver, a ship technician, and even spent time doing remote inspections for the government. The guy had seen just about everything, so when he told me this story, I didn't doubt a single word. He said it happened back in 2013 when he was hired by a small county up in Washington state to do a structural inspection of an old, decommissioned lighthouse. The county had inherited the property years earlier and didn't know what to do with it. Developers wanted to tear it down, historians wanted to preserve it, and no one wanted to pay for either. So Ian's job was simple. Go there alone, assess the place inside and out, and figure out whether it was even safe to restore. The lighthouse stood on a remote rock island about an hour off the mainland, not a big island either. Just a hunk of stone and dirt maybe 300 feet wide, with nothing but the lighthouse itself, a generator shed, and some rusted-out scaffolding from decades past. The place hadn't been used in years, and it wasn't exactly a tourist destination. There weren't even any docks, just a small ledge where a Coast Guard boat could offload someone at high tide. Ian packed light. Food for 4 days, a sleeping bag, some tools, a clipboard, and a two-way marine radio. The plan was simple: it'd get dropped off Monday morning, do a full walkthrough by Wednesday, and call in for pickup Thursday afternoon. He didn't think twice about going alone. He'd done this kind of job dozens of times before. When he first got there, the place was quiet. Cold, cloudy, but calm. The air had that mix of salt, metal, and decay you expect from something that's been sitting abandoned for decades. The lighthouse itself was tall, maybe 50 feet, built in the early 1900s. It had the classic spiral staircase inside leading up to the beacon room. The glass lens hadn't worked in decades, but the structure itself was solid. Ian went about his usual routine, checking support beams, stair integrity, and window fittings. The floorboards on the lower level were warped but still walkable. The second floor was a storage room, empty except for some rusted metal cabinets. The third floor had a tiny sleeping quarter that hadn't been used in decades. He ended up laying out his sleeping bag on the ground floor near the generator room where it was warmer and out of the wind. The first night was uneventful quiet, almost too quiet, he said. You don't realize how noisy the world usually is until it ain't. There were no birds, no insects, not even the sound of waves slapping against the rocks outside. Just wind, and even that was soft. On the second day, the fog rolled in thick. Ian woke up to a completely white world outside. He said you couldn't see more than 5 feet beyond the window. It wasn't like any fog he'd seen before. It was so dense it looked solid, like a wall, but he didn't think much of it. That area got heavy fog often. He spent most of the day taking notes on the upper stairwell. That's when he noticed the first strange thing. Halfway up the staircase to the beacon room, there was a maintenance closet built into the wall. He'd tried to open it on day one, but the hinges were so corroded it wouldn't budge. Now, though, it was open a crack. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough to tell it had been moved. He figured the moisture in the air had caused it to shift, but the sight of it bothered him more than he cared to admit. The inside of the closet was pitch black, and when he pushed the door open wider, he saw something sitting in the back corner, a wooden box, maybe the size of a lunchbox, covered in a damp green moss as if it had been underwater recently. He didn't open it. He just shut the door again and made a note to report it that night. Sometime after midnight, something woke him up. He said it wasn't a sound exactly, it was the absence of sound, like everything had stopped at once. No wind, no waves, no distant creak of the lighthouse settling, just total, unnatural silence. Then he heard footsteps on the metal stairs above him. At first, he thought maybe an animal had gotten inside, but then he realized the sound wasn't coming down. It was going up. Whatever was in the tower was climbing. He grabbed his flashlight and stared at the stairwell entrance, waiting. Nothing happened. The footsteps continued slowly, one by one, echoing higher and higher into the tower until they stopped completely. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. The next day, Ian searched the entire lighthouse from top to bottom, every room, every closet, even the roof. Nothing. No birds, no rats, no footprints inside, nothing out of place except for one thing, that box. It was no longer in the closet. It was sitting out in the stairwell, halfway between floors, still slick with moss. He said he stood there for a long time just staring at it, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, he picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, the wood bloated and damp, and the lid nailed shut. He didn't want to mess with it too much, so he carried it down and left it by the base of the stairs, then went outside for some air. That's when he noticed something else. There were footprints in the dirt around the lighthouse. Bare footprints. Not boots, not shoes bare, wet feet. They led from the north side of the building toward the cliff edge and then stopped. The footprints didn't loop back. There were maybe 10 or 12 impressions in the mud, ending abruptly at a sheer drop into the sea. He said he stood there a long time trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had come ashore, but the only scheduled boat was his pickup, and that wasn't due until the next day. He thought about calling for an early extraction, but the fog was so thick that the Coast Guard probably couldn't have navigated back safely. He went inside, locked every door and hatch, and wedged the stairwell shut with an iron pipe, then tried to sleep. That night was worse. Around 1:30 a.m., he heard the door to the upper beacon room slam shut violently. He said the force shook dust loose from the ceiling. Then came the knocking 3 slow knocks on the inside wall of the tower. Not the front door, not a window, but the wall itself, like someone standing just inches behind the plaster tapping their knuckles against the brick. Ian didn't move. He lay there frozen until the sound stopped. When the sun came up, he checked everything again. The box was gone, and the closet door was fully open. At this point, it was abundantly clear he wasn't alone there, so Ian used the radio and called for immediate extraction. The fog was still heavy, but he told them it was a medical issue. They said they'd try to get a boat there within a few hours. He packed everything and waited by the landing ledge. The fog didn't clear. In fact, it apparently got thicker. He sat there for nearly 7 hours, unable to see anything more than a few feet in front of him. The sun was going down, and the air had gotten cold. He heard someone walking behind him in the gravel near the base of the lighthouse, but when he turned around, there was no one there, or maybe he just couldn't see through the fog. He ran to the edge of the cliff and stayed there until he heard the boat horn in the distance. They pulled him out just after dark. The deckhand who helped him on board asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ian told him that the lighthouse was unsafe and should be sealed off. He filed a brief report back at the office, saying the structure was compromised and not fit for entry, but he never mentioned the footsteps or the box. He told me he didn't because he genuinely considered the possibility that he was simply losing his mind in isolation. That was the end of what Ian sent me in writing. He never went back to that lighthouse. He wrapped up his remaining projects that year and quietly phased himself out of field work. Within a year, he stopped taking contracts altogether, saying he wanted to focus on dry land from then on. When I asked if it was because of the lighthouse, he just shrugged and said he'd seen enough out there. I pressed him once, just once, about what he really thought happened on that island. He looked me dead in the eye and said something that stuck with me ever since. Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time and silence. That was all he'd say. I tried to look into the lighthouse myself a while back, but I couldn't find much. The coordinates he'd scribbled in his notes don't point to any listed structure. The county records mention a decommissioned tower somewhere off the coast, but there's no official name and no accessible history. It's like he was never really there in the first place. And that's the part that unsettles me most, not what Ian said, but what nobody else ever did.